Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Congratulations on getting here. We are almost all radical feminists here, and so possibly the epitome of TERFs. We've been radfem since the 1970s, and our analysis of gender identity ideology has been consistent since then, so for 50 years. And in 2018, we wrote the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which lays out our position, and we're very proud to say it has not changed. Most of us have signed it here. There are 38,231 signatories from 160 countries, and we are supported by 531 organisations. We see this declaration as very important in showing that there is global resistance to gender identity ideology and coming from this feminist position that we have. It's based on the United Nations Convention on the elimination of discrimination against women, and we believe that that convention should be gone forward with, should be improved on and implemented rather than undermined almost entirely by substituting the word gender for sex. I'm really pleased to say that today we have Paula Bolton from the UK. She is going to talk about how should politically homeless women vote, and she's very experienced and knows a lot about politics, so the political parties, and so that's going to be an amazing insight. Then we're having Lynn Alderson, who also is very politically experienced within the UK and is going to be talking about what's happening with the UK parties. Then we're going to have Shu-Fan Lin and Iris, who are from Taiwan. And I'm sorry, I haven't got Iris's surname, but we'll give you that later. And they are from Taiwan, including the Taiwan Women's Association, doing a fantastic stance against gender identity ideology in Taiwan. We're going to hear from them about what's going on in Taiwan and what they're doing about it. And then we're going to hear from Sally Wainwright from Scotland, Audacious Women Disrupted. Our first speaker I will introduce is Paula Bolton. She is going to explore how we can vote as politically homeless women, campaigning within our various parties, the Labour position, and the work ahead and on cross-party alliances. So thank you so much, Paula, and over to you.
I am currently politically homeless after a lifetime in the Labour movement. I know I'm not alone, and I wanted to share my journey campaigning within Labour and share the cross-party alliances I made on the way. I'd be interested to see if there are others in the same boat and look at the way forward. So if you could please fill in the poll, it'll just give us a bit of an idea. How can we have any influence in a system that ignores and silences our voices? And if the polls are to be believed, Labour may well be the next government. So what will we be asking of them? As for voting, is there any point in spoiling your ballot? Lynn will take you through the pros and cons of the various parties. But so anyway, I'm from a very political family. My granny was a founder member of the Communist Party and one of the first female Labour councillors. My dad was a Labour councillor and then later joined the Communist Party. And I was in the Young Communist League when I was 14. I'm 67, so that's a lifetime in left-wing politics. Through student politics, the peace movement and the women's movement, I've always been active, doing whatever I can to make sure that we have a future based on equality and fairness for all, especially women. I've been in and out of the Labour Party. I left once over Clause 4 and I left again over Iraq, but I rejoined when Jeremy Corbyn appeared to be giving us a socialist vision, which inspired some hope in me. And I'm going to start this journey at 2018, when I was part of my local constituency party and all women shortlists were the issue. Suddenly they were open to self-ID, and trying to argue that I thought would be quite simple. Just literally point out that this wouldn't work and ask for clarification about what it meant, look in the rule book, and that's when you discover sex and gender are used indiscriminately and all the way through. It's an absolute mess. And that's when the silencing began. I was up against a trans-identified male who had his story to share at one of our meetings of his own transition, and the Be Kind Brigade around the table gave him 3/4 of the meeting to describe in detail his operation. The rest of us had 15 minutes to talk him down, and I spoke out very firmly, and that's the day I lost my local tribe. He's been trolling me ever since. He accuses me of having authored the Labour Transphobes Declaration, which is ridiculous, but it was a really, the Jaws music almost happened in the room that day. I could feel that this place where I'd previously felt totally at home had changed irrevocably. So I found Labour women having the same experience via Zoom, at conference and online. And in 2019, we formed the Labour Women's Declaration, which is a signatory to this group. And of course, by then, WDI had done their declaration. So, you know, we were aware of the power of doing those. And all we agreed with in that group, Labour is a very broad church, were the 7 points of the declaration, which you can see on screen. They mirror very much what there is in the WDI declaration, but also, you know, some of them are Labour specific. Now, the comments that came on those petitions, that's what I think the power is, because it proves we're not in a minority. These are the sorts of things that are still being written this month on that petition. And I love the third one there. Thank goodness I found you. We need more feminists to shout about this and prevent the right wing from claiming the moral high ground. These will be available for the talk afterwards, because there's not really that much time to read them. Anyway, I believe in networking. So since this kind of snowball effect of declarations and petitions had got going, I reached out to other parties. And that's when I met the amazing Karen Varley in 2020, who was doing the same with Conservative women. And together we launched Women Uniting. And the aim was to reach women who were not in political parties, because the issue of only talking to women that are already political, you know, was needed addressed. And again, this petition is still getting signatures, even though we have stepped away from this organisation. It's still up there online. 7, the next one, please, Bernadette. This was what we actually called for. And if you think it was written yesterday, it was launched at the first Let Women Speak from the ladder in Hyde Park on International Women's Day 2020. We call upon the government, specifically the Right Honourable Elizabeth Liz Truss MP, Minister for Women and Equalities, to commit to the following: clarify and enshrine in law the legal definitions of woman and sex, in order to make current legislation clear and unambiguous, and ensure data used to inform government policies correctly recorded. 2, publish guidance explaining and enforcing the single-sex exemptions in the Equality Act 2010. A new statutory code of practice must help everyone be clear on what single-sex means, as recommended by the Women and Equality Select Committee in July 2019. And 3, ensure all new laws, amendments and policies are assessed for their impact on 51% of the population, e.g. women and girls. So as you can see, it's not rocket science, is it? And we've been saying it since in lots of different ways. Part of the ask at the moment is to clarify the Equality Act. We're still getting signatures, even though we've closed that down. And I think it gives voice. You know, if people stumble upon these things online, they get to speak without being silenced by the TRAs. Anyway, we also linked up lots of women's organisations through a Facebook group and found other political women's pledge groups. So Lib Dems, the Greens, the WEP and the Communist Party. For a while, we had monthly meetings. And from that, there was a parliamentary group that grew, which still operates in the corridors of power, arranging briefings, cross-party briefings to friendly MPs and Lords, those in the Lords. And that excellent work is, I have to say, largely steered by Karen Varley. So thank you for that, Karen. what we found in the other parties is it was the same battles, but different methods: suspensions, targeting, expulsions, gerrymandering, anything to silence women speaking out on these issues. And it was a very odd feeling working across tribal lines. Your old beliefs were being challenged. Now, back in Labour Women's Declaration, I was a tenacious letter writer. That was partly my job, following up correspondence, to which there was never an answer. But David Evans, the General Secretary, had been sent a portfolio about how women in the Labour Party had been targeted. And it was growing all the time. He hadn't even read the one we sent. I was angry at the no debate idea that was coming across to us, and decided that after a sub-meeting at a Labour Women's Declaration gathering in 2020, there was a group of lesbians in one corner, a group of trade unionists in another, a group of councillors in another. And we decided perhaps if we had lesbian Labour, the LGBTQ XYZ door is always open. So we might be able to walk through that door and take with us the arguments about women's sex-based rights. In April 2021, we launched, we'd been forming it for a while, Lesbian Labour. And it was absolutely ridiculous to discover that we had even less of an entry because there was we asked to be friends of the Labour Party, no friend status was granted. LGBT Labour were against us from the minute we joined, and we did ask them to work with us. They wrote back and said, we will not work with you because you represent a negligible proportion of lesbians. So the battle was on then to prove that actually we are not a few, that we are many. And it's been an uphill battle. The need for more lesbians led me to use the same rationale as with Women Uniting. So we started Lesbian Fight Back in December 2021. And partly because I was receiving a lot of hostility from lesbians who had previously been Labour and were angry with the Labour Party. And we needed a Labour voice to counter LGBT Labour. So at that point, I was being investigated by the Labour Party, as I expected to be, for anti-Semitism and hostility to gender reassignment. And that was for letting them know who the funders were of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, an email I'd written in 2018, to which I've never received a reply. But there we go. And since I was under investigation, I was unable to stand as a local councillor. So that's the sort of shenanigans that was going on. I knew it would come to my door eventually. So 2022, LWD were refused a stall at conference, and we campaigned outside. 2023, while I was on tour with Tonya Gievjon for the Lesbian Not Criminal tour, I was speaking as Lesbian Labour, and I was actually booed, which told me everything I needed to know. Labour were losing women, Labour were losing lesbians. So shortly after that, Labour dropped the self-ID. We thought there was a bit of hope. And the next conference, we were inside. LWD actually got inside and had a proper meeting, and Lesbian Labour had a fringe meeting, because by this time I was working with Gay Men's Network and the LGB Alliance to make sure that there was a voice coming from there. Now that was such an awful atmosphere at that conference. I cried all the way home. I was attacked verbally by Angela Regal in front of everybody at the reception on the first night of the women's conference. I went to shake hands with her and I said, "Hello, I'm Paula Bolton from Lesbian Labour." She leapt back and said, "I'm not going to speak to you. I don't agree with you," etc., etc. And I was handled off the stage by handlers, and there's been no, despite their assurances, there's been no apology since. Anyway, basically in Labour, LGBT Labour have got it sewn up. There is only one type of lesbian, and that's the Angela Regals of this world. Joanna Cherry is fighting a losing battle in there, in Parliament, trying to say that there are many of us. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And with all of the shenanigans going on backstage, and then finally Gaza, I left the Labour Party. I've continued to work with Lesbian Labour because we represent the wider Labour movement. And there's been things like meeting Victor Borlos Madrigal about the SOGI issue at the UN. We've met Lloyd Russell Moyle to try and argue about conversion therapy. One of the parliamentary briefings we had was for lesbians and spoke to Reem Al-Salem about violence against women and girls, particularly lesbians, and carried on growing the Lesbian Fight Back group, which has now got 25 different lesbian organisations working together with about 47 lesbians. A declaration last Friday, and we got to 968 signatures before change.org took it down. So we're still challenging them on that. But it does prove the numbers. And I'd just like to say, where are we now? These are some of the things that lesbians are telling us. We know it because we know what we are and what's going on. But there've been all the recent wins. There've been the investigations into Stonewall, the Tavistock, WPATH. The Tories had finally got it right and were well briefed on puberty blockers, the Cass report, NHS guidance, schools guidance and safeguarding. And then there was the rumble about a snap election. Well, you know you're in a political quandary when you hope that the party you fought against all your life are given a few more months to get things nailed down. Now, ironically, on the day the election was announced, we'd just managed as Lesbian Labour to finally secure meetings with Wes Streeting to talk about Cass, Bridget Phillipson to talk about education, and Annalise Dodds to talk about hate crime, conversion practice, and the Equality Act 2010. So there's work to be done, and Lesbian Labour will continue to do that. Whoever gets in, and as I say, polls predict is going to be Labour. Lesbian Labour have just put these demands out: reaffirm the meanings of sex and sexual orientation. And I have to say to any of the women's groups, when you're arguing for the clarification of sex, please mention the third protected characteristic of sexual orientation. It's not just a clash between sex and gender reassignment, it's that third one as well. We definitely need to separate sexual orientation and gender identity, and our right to gather and have same-sex spaces and provisions needs to be protected. It's not even talked about. Protecting young lesbians from gender ideology, because we know from the Cass report, we knew anyway, but Cass has proved it, that the majority of those girls being referred are in fact left to their own devices, would be lesbians when they grew up, and fully implement the recommendations of the Cass review. As you'll have seen from the manifesto, they think they can implement Cass and have conversion therapy, no loopholes. So how on earth do you progress as somebody that's politically homeless? Like me, you can get on board with any of the parties and help with all the lobbying. There's always help needed: admin help, letter writing. There's boring stuff in the background. I know Vol's online endlessly doing lists of who to send things out to. You know, I mean, it's like watching paint dry, but lobbying needs to happen. You can spoil your ballot. Apparently, as long as you write none, it does work. In Derby, they show the spoiled ballots on a big screen. So if you do want to protest, check with your returning officer what they do, because it might well be a chance. Although yesterday I spoke to some people who sit in the booth, you know, guarding the booths all day, and they said it's pointless. It just makes more work for the tellers. Nobody reads them, nobody notices, but it is, you know, a point. Strategic voting, wherever you are. Obviously, there's now the Party of Women. So if for you the key message is the women's message, and there's nothing to lose in your constituency, help out, get that message heard. And let's make sure we get Rosie Duffield back in, and Tonia Antoniazzi, Joanna Cherry, Neil Hanvey, whatever anybody can do to make sure that there's at least a voice in Parliament speaking for us. So any gender critical MPs that you can find anywhere. And don't trust anybody who has not grasped the nettle and spoken the truth about women's issues, because if they can lie about this, they can lie about anything. And there's others who would say, as any good socialist would have done back in the day, you vote holistically and you put your own thing back down the agenda. If Labour is right for the economy, despite them being wrong for women, vote Labour. I don't know what I'm going to do. And actually, I'm doing a postal ballot for the first time ever, because I'll be camping with a load of women at the reinvigorated Women in Tune Festival on the day of the election. The other thing I just would warn you about is the Chris Smith list, which is a list that LGBT Labour have put together, and you can look it up online. Those MPs have signed a pledge from LGBT Labour basically the opposite of what's on screen at the moment. We put this little video together. This is what we're telling Labour at the moment.
So I was a member of the Labour Party until something tipped me over the edge.
I'm currently politically homeless after a lifetime of supporting the Labour Party.
I'm a lifelong Labour voter, but I intend to vote Conservative at this election because I do not trust Keir Starmer.
Labour has collectively failed us.
People are trying to redefine what it means to be gay and lesbian, and I want to make it clear. Same-sex sexual orientation exists, and it isn't about gender.
In a world of gender, homosexuality will lose its meaning.
We're called bigots and sexual racists by you and organisations that you support. How dare you?
We are not homogeneral. You can't even say it.
How can Labour as a party stand up and say they're for lesbians and gay rights when they tacitly endorse our sterilisation?
I fear for young lesbians. I don't want them to experience homophobia or to be told they can change their sex.
You know, if I was 7 years old now, it'd be dropping down the gender thing.
This whole gender thing is an absolute assault on the reality of sex, on our sexual orientation, on lesbians, on gays, on our language that we have to describe ourselves as a sexual minority.
It's a tyranny of a group of people who have nothing to do with traditional Labour values.
Labour will need to convince me that the rights of women, LGBT people and children will be protected under a future Labour government as opposed to decimated.
No X for me until you respect my same-sex attraction.
And we will go to other parties if we absolutely have to.
Let's all encourage Labour to be braver.
So we're now going to hear from Lynn Alderson. She is a second wave radical lesbian feminist, member of Sister Right Bookshop Collective and Trouble and Strife Radical Feminist magazine. In the last few years, Lynn has been working with Labour Women's Declaration to influence party policy, also with other gender-critical feminists in other parties. And she's going to be looking at party policies and manifesto commitments. So thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you so much for Sister Right and Trouble and Strife as well, that many of us remember. Okay, over to you.
I'm just going to run through some of the basic positions that are expressed in the manifestos of the main parties, first of all, so that we get a grip on exactly how far they're saying that they'll go along the gender identity line. So firstly, the Liberal Democrats, they are supporting self-identification, just straightforwardly. But not just for trans-identified people, but for non-binary identifying people too. There's no indication about how such an identity, which isn't even based in material reality, can be actually incorporated into law. There's a lack of detail about what they intend to do, but when they say they're supporting self-identification, they mean that they will be supporting laws to that effect. They're also talking about the removal of the spousal veto. Now, for those of you who don't understand what that is, that's a piece of the Gender Recognition Act, which protects the wives and families of men who want to legally change their sex. And it just gives a pause for them to have a think about whether they want to stay or leave or have the marriage annulled, since the marriage is no longer what it was when they agreed to take it. So several of the parties are saying that they will remove that, which is a relatively small thing in terms of how many people it affects, but it's immensely cruel to say that that should be removed when these families, these women and families, are in such extraordinary difficult circumstances. So they don't give any indication of how they're going to do all of this. But as an overall approach, it's pretty disastrous vis-a-vis women's rights. There's no concessions to women that I can see. And, as Paula has said, there are women in each of these parties who've been fighting tooth and nail on this. And certainly none of us have been treated that well. But the women in the Liberal Democrats have been treated really badly. There is an organisation called Liberal Voice for Women that have been trying to raise these issues for a number of years now, and there's now a declaration as well. So that's just basically the Liberal Democrats. The Greens are very similar in the sense that they're also unequivocally supporting self-identification. And again, for non-binary people. So this is the most extreme end, I'd say. If we look at what the Greens did in Scotland, they went into an agreement with the Scottish National Party in order to support the party, which needed more parliamentary votes. And there were three things that the Greens asked for in return for that support. And one of those three things was reform of the Gender Recognition Act. Now, for a party that is meant to be focused on environmental issues, and I think we need a party of that kind, it's extraordinary that they would put this so high in their agenda. They are uncompromising, and I'm sure there's some Green women in here who will tell you about how badly they have been treated as well. So, in a sense, they're the kind of extreme end, I think. They're probably the most extreme, although when you see Ed Davey talking about women with penises, which he seems perfectly happy to do, then, you just feel that the whole party is a mess, really. But they don't give up. We don't give up. Any of us in these parties don't give up. We keep on fighting. So they don't mention the Equality Act, they don't mention safeguarding, they don't mention any of the conflicts, and they speak about fairness, but what they say and what they do, they certainly have not been fair to the gender critical women in their party. And we know that there's a number of court cases coming up in relation to the Greens, women who are challenging them because of the way they've been treated. And to be honest, they seem perfectly willing to almost bankrupt their party rather than to make any concessions to these women's rights. So, it's an extraordinary situation with them. The situation in Scotland, vis-a-vis that particular reform, there was a massive response from women in Scotland who fought magnificently. They were ignored. They would not be allowed into consultations. It was a real carve up, essentially. And that piece of legislation did go through. It was then stopped by the UK government, who said that it impacted upon the Equality Act, and therefore, they could not do it because that was a piece of UK-wide legislation. So that's where it sits at the moment. Now, the Conservatives, they've done the best of the statements that any of the parties have made. It's a clear statement. It says that biological sex is a reality. It says that they will clarify sex in the Equality Act to make sure that it means biological sex. They will keep the whole business of gender recognition to the UK government rather than letting it go to the devolved nations, that's Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. That they will make guidance in education statutory, and they will allow parents the right to see what their children are being taught. That they will implement the caste review. And indeed, we shouldn't forget that they commissioned the caste review, and that they will reinforce single-sex accommodation rights in hospitals and in care. And just to remind people what the caste review was, that was a piece of independent, high-level research that looked at all of the work that was taking place around young gender non-conforming people and the kind of treatments that they were being given and exposed to. And it was deeply, well, it wasn't shocking to us because we'd been saying for a long time that this needed to be examined and stopped. And it has been, I think, hugely impactful because it made it clear that there was no real evidence that the kind of regimes that these kids were being put through were in any way effective. They didn't take into account the young people's situations. There was no recognition of factors like autism or depression or any other issues they may have had. The affirmation model that was used at Tavistock, you know, was one which was also being, I think, adopted by most of the counselling organisations within the country. So it was quite a serious situation. And as Paula said, we've all been very concerned about young lesbians, young gay men who are being pushed into those regimes. And there was no notice taken of detransitionism either. So the research showed that this was a really serious medical scandal, which is what we've been saying, that the ordinary standards of treatment were not being met, just ordinary standards really that they would apply to other things. So the Tavistock has been disbanded and the CAS review has recommended that the treatment and processing of these young people should be devolved to different regional centres and put within a more holistic framework so that it isn't just isolated in this way and focused on the affirmation model. So we're very glad to see, parties commit to implementing that because it's actually got much wider implications. We'll come on to those a bit in a moment than just those specific ones. So that's good stuff from the Conservatives. I will just make one comment about that, which is that they have had 14 years to sort some of this out. And I think that we need to pay attention to the fact also that their leadership is likely to change in the next little while, whatever happens at the election. I don't think that the Conservative Party is secure on these issues. We know, and some of those Conservative women can speak for themselves, they've had a right loyal battle to get this through. And, I admire those women enormously and I think they've been very effective. I don't think it means that we've just got a safe haven in the Conservative Party either. Okay, all of the parties have been subjected to lobby groups who've been, working not just within the parties, but across Parliament. And it isn't just the obvious ones. I think there's a very strong lobby group of gay male MPs as well that work cross-party on some of these issues. So there's a great deal that's been happening for a number of years now, and we are always fighting in reaction to that rather than in a more positive way, really. What's in the Labour Party manifesto then? They will support single-sex exemptions in the Equality Act. It doesn't look at the conflict between that and other areas of their policy, but it's a commitment they've made for a long time, and the Equality Act they see as theirs. They don't want to see it damaged. It was the last thing I think that the Blair government brought in. They have backed off from self-ID, which was in the last manifesto. And they have no mention of non-binary identities, which is another good thing. But it does propose some reform of the GRC process. We're concerned about that. We're concerned about how easy they will make it. It's not clear. I think it's deliberately not clear because they're not sure yet exactly what they're going to do with that. And there's also a ban on conversion therapy in there. And as I said, that conflicts with CAS. We want young people to have the best and most neutral counselling that they need. So they know all of those things are problematical, but they've still gone ahead and put them in there. They have also committed to implementing the CAS report. That's a very good thing. And Starmer said on TV just yesterday, I think, that it does mean full implementation. So they will experience a lot of conflict within these different areas of policy. There's no mention of the spousal veto, which they have previously said they would remove. So that's quite hateful. That's quite helpful. And then there's hate crime. There's a little bit gone in there about sexual orientation, adding to the different kinds of aggravating factors that can be attached to crime. There's no mention of sex, and I think that's a subject that none of the parties are touching really, because if they pick that up, having to take measures around sex as a hate crime would just completely overwhelm them. There is, just very briefly, a very positive program on male violence to women. It includes rape courts, specialist support for women from 999 centres up to trial, action on stalking, allowing women to know the identity of their online stalkers, making spiking an offence. So there's a lot of that. So go and have a look at it. Essentially, they have shifted. To which degree we can say how they'll implement some of these things when they're in government, if they do win the election. You can't say. I think it's not a great priority for them. I don't think it will be top of their list. I think with equality work, the race equality amendments to those acts are going to be more of a priority for them. I suspect they will do one of the things that they often do, which is to kick it into the long grass if it proves difficult. So that's the background to this. I need to stop now. There's lots more I could say. I'm going to stay through to the breakout room. So if anybody wants to go on talking about this, then I'm happy to do that. I won't tell anybody how to vote, of course, but the campaigns by Sex Matters, Women's Right Network, Labour Women's Declaration, and others are asking you all to try and make sure that you know what your candidate's position is, because the candidates may well not have the same position as their party. So make sure you know, and make sure they know that you care about it, and actually, get in there. If they're on the doorstep, tell them that it matters to you.
I'm going to introduce it. So Shu-Fan Lin is from Taiwan, and she is an independent educator who teaches children language. It wasn't until the Lauren Hubbard issue came to light in 2021 that she discovered the contentious arguments surrounding transgenderism. She began translating foreign news about trans activism and collaborated with friends to establish the Taiwan Women's Association, which Shu-Fan is chairperson of. Now, we also have Iris here, but who is not going to show her face, but she might join in and say things during Shu-Fan's speech or at the end of it. So it's so fantastic you're here, Shu-Fan, and I'm so looking forward to hearing what you've been doing and what's happening in Taiwan. So thank you very much, and over to you.
I'm honored to address you on behalf of Taiwan Women Association. I'm Shu-Fan. I'm the chair of TWA, and we are a newborn NGO gathered by people who accidentally discovered the trans movement abroad. At the time, at the last Olympic Games, about the Lauren Hubbard, we further noticed that our government found a questionnaire, and a government found that researchers, they use misleading questions and preset answers, and only by dispatching those questionnaires to queer groups, they try to fabricate the public opinion as willing to accept transgenderism, the gender ideology, which we have revealed to the public. And therefore, the public gave opposing feedbacks to the questionnaires. And so the research closed with the conclusion that the public opposes with self-ID because of a lack of education. So the government-funded researchers, they think even now, they think Taiwanese women should be re-educated. Astonishingly and sadly, we found no women's rights groups in Taiwan. No one respond to our worries. We try to connect to many women's rights groups in Taiwan, but no one respond our worries, or they thought we're just anti-transgender. So, my friend and I formed TWA in response to the cruel reality that our traditional and famous feminist group in Taiwan abandoned women. So, in a sense, as far as we know, we are the only formally registered NGO fighting and focusing on women's rights as the institution's agenda, but standing against transgeology in Taiwan, because we have other sister groups, but they haven't registered formally yet in Taiwan. So today I will shed light on the current state of transgender activism in the public sector of Taiwan, the judicial progress, and the responses from various societal sectors. The first of all, I'm going to talk about administrative developments. In the realm of administration from our government, the Ministry of Education has been proactive in aligning with international trends, promoting policies that allow male students to participate in women's sports. Even before formal policy were in place, male university students were permitted to compete in women's events under the pretext of a lack of explicit regulations. So we had information on such issues that an intersex student competed with general female students and won a couple of competitions. Other female athletes do not have the audacity to stand up for their rights because of the willingness of the university officials and the Ministry of Education. Recently, the Ministry of Education has issued directives to secondary school. It says dormitory should avoid gender segregation, sex segregation, and they have to assist transgender individuals in concealing their identities. Our Ministry of Education, they told the school that they have the responsibility to hide and conceal truths from students if they put a male in female's dormitory. So we believe these will eventually harm female students. Such guidance may lead to parents' ignorance of their children's mental conditions. The Ministry of Education has issued directives to secondary school dormitory, and they give guidance to school that they have to keep parents from knowing their children's mental conditions. According to the UK and the US experiences, which we deeply research and refer to, eventually they will lead to young girls becoming much more vulnerable. University have been encouraged to establish mixed dormitory. It means they have to put boys and girls together in the same dormitory, leading to a reduction in the availability of beds in women's dormitory. We believe these will eventually harm female students who want to stay in a single-sex environment, especially those who are economically restricted. Additionally, the Ministry of Health and Welfare supports an abolition of surgical requirements for gender recognition. And the Ministry of Health and Welfare's guidance influences the consultant systems in school. The Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Justice continuously develop measures related to public spaces, military service, police handling of gender-related issues, and other policies. For example, gender-friendly restroom in public places and the police search based on gender identity are under consideration and have become the recommendation for these units. These are not laws. However, administrative instruction always guides and formulates society as a leading procedure before the formal legal regulation is promulgated. Despite overwhelming opposition in public hearings and objections from officials, these measures remain unchanged. One of the most severe issues that threaten to silence women's voice is the draft of anti-discrimination law. This draft will allow NGOs established for more than 3 years to file group lawsuits on behalf of alleged victims of discrimination at a very low cost, seeking civil compensation from the public service provider. The structure of these laws suggests it will be used to silence women's opinion on digital platforms. And judicial progress. In the judicial area, Taiwan has witnessed 2 notable cases where individuals successfully changed their gender markers without undergoing surgery. One case involved a male transitioning to female, and the other a female transitioning to male. The latter does not provide a court-requested psychiatric evaluation, moving closer to the spirit of self-identification. A renowned writer collaborated with Taiwan's leading transgender rights group, the Taiwan Alliance, to promote civil partnership rights. The group name is about promoting civil partnership because there is no legal lawful partnership in Taiwan. They sue several women with help from his brother because the renowned writer, his brother is a lawyer. He accused these women of privacy and defamation violations for referring to him as a transgender woman, while criticizing his representation of women for ignoring the risk of transgenderism. Although these cases were ultimately not prosecuted, the writer has recently filed civil lawsuit seeking civil compensation of about 70,000 British pounds from one of the women. The Taiwan Women Association is assisting in fundraising for the defendant right now. The writer has repeatedly supported transgender policies as a woman. He used the identity of a woman, criticizing Japanese women movement for not recognizing transgender women as peers, and pressure lesbian bars to open their women-only nights to transgender women, despite promoting his novel as semi-autobiography. His work featuring lesbian protagonists. He recently declared on Facebook that he should not be labeled as a lesbian or considered a public figure. But he's a very well-known writer in Taiwan because he won many awards in Taiwan and in Japan. Public response and our strategy. The opposition to self-identification in Taiwan has seen citizens petitioning both ruling and opposition parties with little success. Members of the Democratic Progress Party is the ruling party in Taiwan, and its own women's department, now called Gender Equality Department. It used to be women's department of the party, but now it is Gender Equality Department of the party. So they has received numerous complaints, but they publicly claim that they never received any complaints. Furthermore, they posted on Facebook suggesting that we who protest against the transgender ideology are spreading disinformation, or they suggesting that we are the spy from China because we have a very complicated political situation with China. So they suggesting that if we fight against the policy, the transgender policy, transgender right policy, we might be spies. Okay, and I want to talk about, so we face what kind of challenging, and I made a conclusion. Our challenges are multifaceted. We face many different challenges. Only one media outlet in Taiwan is willing to address these issues, with so-called progressiveness hindering journalists and academic understanding. Medically, we are unaware of who prescribed improper puberty blocker to children, but we know such thing happened because from our private journal of information is reliable. And politically, while acknowledging the danger partly, politicians often turn a blind eye to avoid offending LGBTQ+ groups. Gender activists leverage their long cultivated influence to push their agendas. We have a great challenge to raise public awareness, as the whole thing sounds too absurd, because we talk to many people and they don't believe it is true. For Taiwanese people, it is impossible for a man who can just declare his gender identity. Even these words, gender identity, is very difficult to understand for Taiwanese people. So they don't believe that. They thought it's too absurd. How come? They think it is possible that our ruling party will agree a man who can declare his female and then he change his legal marker, become a woman. And so many people, they haven't known about the lawsuit that who has a man or a woman who has won the gender marker lawsuit. So it's too absurd and surreal when nothing happens. However, sisters, we all know that the surreal part makes the entire thing so detrimental. We have sporadic complaints, including a little girl being harassed in the school's gender-friendly toilets. Mixed-gendered, mixed-sex toilets. But the mother is worried that revealing the truth may make the girl's school, may threaten the school, because we face a situation that we have less and less kids in Taiwan now. So the mother will worry for the school because she really trusts the teacher, and she said that those teachers have already took actions to deal with the problem. But those little boys in elementary school, they will knock on girls' toilet, and they will knock on the door, try to harass girls while they were using washroom.
So I'll take this part and kind of complement the whole situation. So in our elementary school, we have every school have to get enough students to keep the school running. However, the mother is worrying about if we protest publicly, it will decrease the student that can get for that specific school. And therefore, she refused to collaborate with us and to reveal it to the public and the media, because it will decrease the student who will get into the schools, and the government will shut down the school.
Yeah, so
Okay,
the mother
thank you.
the mother is really kind-hearted. So we are people who use our free time to run for the issues, and our funding shortage and lack of human resources hamper our progress in expanding our helping hands. So especially compared with the ultra-expanding speed of the trans movement, our work to deepen understanding is continuously extremely difficult for us. In conclusion, we must remain vigilant and vocal. The Taiwan Women Association is dedicated to ensuring that the voices of women are heard and that their rights are protected. We call upon all of you to support our efforts and to advocate for the balanced and fair approach to women's rights in Taiwan. Thank you very much.
What is happening about families? Are some like in the States, United States, and also in UK, a lot of family groups are fighting back. Is that the case in Taiwan?
Famous feminism scholars are most support gender ideology, even the radical feminism scholar.
Yes, so I'll take this part. We had a couple of famous radical feminist scholars. They used to speak aloud to protect women's rights, but in this transgender ideology tide, we didn't hear they say anything. I think I only see a feminist say something about this, who is really famous, and I think she is pretty old enough that she is audacious, and she does not fear that somebody will oppress her, because nobody dared to do that. She kind of wrote a book, which is the guidance of the Taiwanese woman for all Taiwanese women, for all Taiwanese feminists, and she's probably the only one. And I heard that you are talking about family group. Is that right? Yes.
Yes, that was. But this is a very good answer as well. But yes, also family groups.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you are asking family groups. Yes, correct. Parents and family groups are actually now our helping hands. We are working with these groups and trying to protect children. I have to say, sadly, people are much aware of children's rights compared to women's rights. So we kind of cut into this issue and try to come back and protect our protect women's rights. From protecting children, which we also recognize, we also read COS report and we are trying to translate it. Thank you for paving our way. For all your efforts, this is kind of give us a chance to buy back to explain and academically that we are having scientific support. And for those family groups, we are giving them policy suggestions and giving them legal discourse that possibly to help them to talk and protest with the government, and also give some like petition to our congressmen. I have to say, we are now having little, I think, not really in a bright side, but we are doing our best.
How about detransitioners?
I mean, our doctors carefully screen people who has gender dysphoria. Just for now, because we know that there are famous two doctors, male doctors, who now they will prescribe the diagnosis for anyone who go to their clinic. So there are, and You know, it is really easy in Taiwan to buy medicine from China. So I know some of our children, someone I personally know, they can bought from the black market. I mean, under table is not, it is not legal. They will bought medicine from internet, and those medicine will sent from China. So it's really for these children to get hormones. But because our medical transition are not so active, so now we don't hear from any, I mean, detransitioner, but we have hear from trans widows now, because there are more and more trans widows in Taiwan. We know some trans widows, but they are not speak publicly, because we know about Lynn is because one of our partners, I mean, someone cooperate with us, they knew he knew many trans personally. So he shared with us about trans widow. And there is a very famous, I mean, I talk about lawsuit case. I mean, lawsuit case for the first one, the male to female. He has a wife, and in the beginning, I mean, long time ago, he has accept interview, and he said that his wife didn't know he's transgender before they got married. So, and he told the reporter that it's really unacceptable for her at first, and we don't know about what happened later.
What we see is that most of the women we call the trans widow, there's public speech express some sort of disappointment. However, they are asking themselves to accept. For any critics who trying to say something for them are deemed as some sort of oppression. I don't know. For those women, these critics on criticism are not helpful, as they are still thinking they are trying to helping their husband. And we also saw a woman on the internet. She spoke she kind of shared her experiences on the website. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, she was quite, let's say, she kind of combat with anyone who against transgender activism. She's pro-activist. She's pro-transgender, and she married with a transgender woman. After 2 years, we saw her expressing and writing article like, this guy, yes, now she say this guy has nothing different with other guy. However, she's not getting divorced. So this is how we have that they kind of stuck here.
We're now going to hear from Sally Wainwright from Scotland. Sally is a serial creator of women's and lesbian spaces, also Scotland contact for WDI, and co-editor of Women's Rights Gender Wrongs, the global impact of gender identity ideology. She's going to talk about Audacious Women Disrupted. So thank you so much, Sally, and over to you.
And there is now a book, The Women Who Wouldn't Wished, which tells the story of the 5-year fight, really, against the introduction of gender self-ID in Scotland. Wished is a wonderful Scottish word that doesn't quite translate into anything, but I suppose it would be shut the fuck up. It's about the closest you can get. So this the book is very similar format actually to the book that Kath and I edited last year with Women's Rights Gender Wrongs, in that there's about 30 short chapters from different women telling the story of their part in the fight against gender identity ideology in Scotland. And I was asked to write a chapter about the Audacious Women Festival. So I'll just say a little bit about that and then talk about what happened. So we set up the Audacious Women Festival in 2016 because somebody I knew had said, oh, I did something today, it made me feel really audacious. Wouldn't it be great if we could do something to encourage other women to do their own audacious act? And you know the way these things, sitting around kitchen tables, lead to something else. And the next thing we knew, we had a festival on our hands with the slogan, do what you always wish you dared. So we were encouraging women to do whatever their own audacious act was. And one of the reasons we liked it is because what's audacious for me might be something you do every day of the week, and vice versa. So we felt it was something that was very, very inclusive in the sense that everybody could take their own starting point and do something that for them was audacious, something that they'd always wanted to do. And to that end, we ran small intensive workshops, really. Some of them were more audacious than others, some of them were more fun. So at the fun end, we had a gilding workshop where people learned to apply gold leaf to bits of artwork. And at the other end, where we had women who were genuinely terrified to go because maybe they'd been silenced all their lives. We had some Scared to Sing workshops. We had a public speaking workshop. We had some mountain biking taster sessions. And I think they were probably the three which women were most anxious about. Oh, motorcycling. And a woman in her 50s or early 60s maybe, who did the motorcycle taster session and then went on to get her full license and everything. And she said to me one day, it's been a lifelong ambition. And she could have done that. She could have done that same taster course any day of the year at the same place that we organised it, but she was able to do it because we were offering it as a women-only event. So we were happily going along, organising these events, and we had some music and we had some theatre and we had some exhibitions, minding our own business. We weren't set up as a political organisation. We didn't think about the politics particularly. This was 2016, remember? And we were just wanting to provide a space for women to come and do their own thing. And so for the first couple of years, we had very little trouble with gender identity ideology, although we were at some point, maybe in year 2 or 3, we were asked if trans women could come. And we remember this was before Forstater, it was before any of the court cases took place. So we were in a very dodgy position legally. And we sort of said rather vaguely, well, somebody who fully transitioned could attend, although nobody that we knew did so. But then in 2019, we got a rather more serious challenge. We actually think it was started by a man in England who was at the time acting as the women's officer of the Labour Party branch, although we can't tell you his name. And he started a fuss on social media about us being transphobic and so on and so forth. And we were asked what our policy was. And at that point, we fell back on the guidance issued by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, because we felt that would put us in a good legal position. I have to say, I wasn't very happy with that. I think none of us, in fairness, I don't think any of my colleagues were particularly happy with it either. But we were very anxious about the legal situation. And the EHRC phraseology, which, to be honest, also wasn't very good, and I didn't like, said that service providers should be aware that where a transsexual person is, and this is the bit that caused offence, visually and for all practical purposes indistinguishable from a non-transsexual person of that gender, they should normally be treated according to their acquired gender, unless there's strong reasons not to do so. Now, to be honest, I think that probably covered us against any transgender, trans-identifying male coming along to our events, due to the fact that not one of them is visually indistinguishable from a woman. But obviously we didn't say that. we were then attacked again for using the phrase and told that we were saying horrible things about trans identifying males, or they call them trans women. And they started to put pressure on. We used two main venues. One was a private venue, one was run by the council. And this all really blew up on the Tuesday of the week that the festival was due to start. And it was due to start on Friday morning. So we didn't have a lot of time to sort it out. And I had the staff from both of the venues on the phone sort of saying, oh, you know, can we go ahead and what's happening and blah, 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 blah. So at that point, we were completely unprepared for this, to be honest with you. I mean, it was in the book, it comes under the section on early skirmishes, and I think we were one of the very first organisations, possibly the only non-political organisation to ever have come under this sort of attack. So anyway, we got in touch with For Women Scotland, who had an emergency meeting with us that evening and reassured us about what we could and couldn't say. And as I say, I spent most of the next day on the phone to them. And on the Wednesday, we were told by the council that, and again, it is important because we were actually using the law, not through going to court, but actually just by arguing about the law. The council ran it past their equalities and committee or section, and the equalities unit confirmed that what we were doing was fully legal. So the council said we could go ahead. Meanwhile, the private venue was a bit more anxious, and I had this guy on the phone to me rather plaintively saying, well, wouldn't it be easier just to let them in? And I'm like, no, Daniel, really, it wouldn't be easier to let them in. And in the end, I mean, in fairness to both of the venues, they let us go ahead, which is quite extraordinary, until on Friday morning. In fact, the first event was at the second venue on the Thursday night. Friday morning, we fetched up at the council building, and the woman that I worked with there came downstairs looking white as a sheet as we were setting up the room for the weekend to say, I don't know if you're going to be allowed to go ahead. And I said, well, I thought this was sorted on Wednesday. And she said, well, there's more questions being asked. So I had to leave my colleague, who was new to Audacious Women, I had to leave her to do all the setting up herself. And I spent the morning on the phone to the PR department. It turned out that they were really concerned about what they were going to say if they were approached, and they weren't sure what to say. So we had lots of conversations again about the law and what we were doing and so on and so forth. And in the end, they agreed that it was okay for us to go ahead. So that was all happening on Friday. And the first event was on Friday morning at, I think it was at 10:30. And at 10:30, and it was a workshop that was being run by the Glasgow Women's Library, well, which I now call Glasgow Men's Library because it was one of the early captured organisations. And at 9:30, they emailed us to say that they weren't coming because our approach to trans-identified males didn't meet their values. And so we had two groups of women turn up to these workshops that were supposed to be running that morning to find basically an empty room. So it wasn't really very impressive, their approach to women. What was perhaps even more serious was that the final event, which was on Monday evening, was a book launch by the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre. And you've probably all been hearing a lot about the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre. This was before the days that Wadwa was the CEO, but again, it had already been captured by transgender ideology. And on the they sent us a very similar email using almost the exact phrase about how our views didn't conform to their values. So I presume the two organisations had been in touch with each other. And on the Saturday afternoon, they confirmed that they weren't willing to work with us and they were pulling their book launch. So two things happened as a result of that. One was that they had been late going into the program because they wanted to do plenty of work with the women who'd written for this book. It was a book of survivors' stories, and they wanted to work with the women who were the authors of these stories to make sure that they felt okay about doing this in a public arena. And then at 24 or 48 hours notice, they suddenly turned around and told those women, we're not doing it after all because the needs of men are more important. And I can't imagine what it must have been like for those women who had been gearing themselves up for some weeks to come and talk in public about their experiences and how they'd survived them, just to have the rug pulled from under them by the people who were supposed to be their biggest support organisation. And I think that perhaps is one of the things that made me most angry about the way that ERCC worked. And then from the second thing that happened as a result of that was that we had a gap in the program because we got people coming to this event and we wanted a final event, and it was just extraordinary. I think it was Marion from For Women Scotland who said, well, turn it into an opportunity. I'll give you the name of a poet in Glasgow. She'll come and read for an hour and a half or something and do a poetry thing. Anyway, we put out some feelers to everybody that I knew and that people knew who were any kind of performers. And Shireen Benjamin, who again some of you might have heard of, flew to the rescue and organised it all for us. And by Monday night, we had the most fantastic event with, I can't remember how many, 6 or 8 different performers, doing an event which we called Festival Finale, something of Fabulous Females, because we thought we'd get the females in just for the heck of it. And it was I think one of the best events we've ever run. And what it really made me understand was just how strong and powerful and fantastic the women's community is when it decides to all come together, because we went from kind of nothing to this really fantastic event in the space of 24 hours. So I was very, very happy about the way that worked out. The following year, we had a second sort of attempt to shut us down. And we were asked to go to a meeting with the council and a councillor who'd raised an issue about whether or not we were transphobic and legal. And there was a lot of shenanigans about the meeting. I won't go into all the details. But anyway, it turned out that we had the councillor, the woman who I normally worked with, myself, one of my colleagues, and a chap from the council who'd heard from me the day before about what was going on. He was the estates manager. He was responsible for the building, and he'd been showing me around the building the day before, and he heard what was going on, and he just waltzed into this meeting because he was so appalled by what he had heard was happening that he decided he'd come into our meeting and support us, which was really extraordinary. And then on the other side, we had what was supposed to be just the council's pride officer, but he had brought with him the woman who then ran the Scottish Trans Alliance. Now, unbeknownst to anybody, my colleague had been previously in a lesbian relationship, with a woman who announced she was a man. And so my colleague had quite a lot of knowledge well, she knew a lot of the people involved, and she knew the woman who was running STA. And they were sort of friendly. And what actually happened was really amazing, because they just sat and had a little conversation, a pair of them, while the rest of us sat around the table. And the woman who was running the STA agreed that what we were doing was legal, and everybody went away and happy. And we haven't had, well, the next year really COVID hit, but we haven't had any trouble since then with the trans activists themselves. But we're finding increasingly that it's difficult to get venues. So the venue the Notts Council venue that I said that we worked with, that let us go ahead then, and the following year let us run a women-only event, which normally we didn't do there, now won't even return our emails. And they've got a man who thinks he's a woman floating around their reception desk, and I think he's probably involved in the programming now. So we've lost that venue, and other venues have also tried to refuse our bookings. So most interestingly, we found a sort of small little cinema. We had a film we were going to show, a film by Nina Paley, that some of you probably seen her work, and it was all set up, and a week before the event, a couple of us went to kind of again chat to the manager, and in the course of it, we said something that made him think we might be transphobes, I suppose. And the next thing I knew, an hour later, we had an email from him saying that he likes to run a really inclusive venue, and so we aren't welcome. And I have later since then pointed out to him that being inclusive by excluding people was a bit silly, and he did recognise that. So we wrote to him a very short but effective letter, again saying, did he realise that this was illegal? That when Nottingham Council had done the same to Julie Bindle, it had cost the council a small amount in compensation, but £10,000 in legal fees, and we didn't want to take legal action, but we would speak to a lawyer if we needed to. And he rolled over and let us use the place, and has since said, although he's never sent it to me, so I don't know if it's true or not, that he was writing a new lettings policy, which would be inclusive and blah 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 blah, all of which we were quite anxious about, but also would recognise the need for free speech. So I think that was quite a victory. So if I can just say something about the context, which I also talk about in the book, which is that I think that the creation of women's and lesbian, although the Audacious Women Festival isn't a lesbian event, it's a women's event, the creation of women's and lesbian spaces and the maintenance of them is absolutely essential. And it seems to me that in a lot of the debate that we've been having, or arguments that we've been having over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of talk about what's called safe spaces, toilets, changing rooms, prisons, and so on. Now, I don't want anything I say to be taken as saying that they're not absolutely essential. They're absolutely essential that those spaces are safe. My point is that the debate has largely been confined to these, if you like, situational spaces, circumstantial spaces that are needed in particular circumstances. So, you need a safe changing room when you're getting changed, but a women only changing room when you're getting changed, but it's not part of your day-to-day life. Whereas, particularly for lesbians, it's very much part of our day-to-day existence. I mean, I talk about how...
Sally, sorry, can I get you 2 minutes? Brilliant, great, good.
I'm nearly at the end. 2 minutes, give me 2 minutes, yeah. I used to live actually with Lynn in a lesbian housing co-op in London, and there was, I can't remember, lots and lots and lots of houses that we squatted. Can you imagine us being able to have a lesbian co-op today? It was a fundamental part of our life and of our being, and I think that the need for women's and lesbian social and cultural spaces is something that's been very overlooked, not by every single person obviously, but largely overlooked in the discussion. I think that when people started thinking about it, like Paula said, you just think people are going to listen to common sense. You just need to say, well, if you let men into women's changing rooms, women are at risk of being raped, and that the men would go, oh no, we can't have that. But of course, that's not what happened at all. So I understand why that's how it started. But I do think that the more general need for cultural and social spaces has been overlooked. So, I mean, I could talk about that a lot more, but I need to finish now. So I've got 2 asks, really, of those of you watching. One is buy the books. I say books because I never miss an opportunity to push the WDI book, Women's Rights, Gender Wrongs, along with The Women Who Wouldn't Wish, which, by the way, Women Who Wouldn't Wish is an instant bestseller. On the same day that it was published, it sold out on Amazon, and it went into the bestseller lists where it's sat for the last fortnight. It's absolutely extraordinary. It went to a reprint the day after it was published. The most extraordinary thing, it's been called the most important book on politics to come out of Scotland this century and stuff. It's really a very, very detailed look, and it's well worth the read. So that's my first ask. And my second ask is that when you're speaking to anybody, please try and incorporate not just the need for safe spaces, but the need for women's cultural and social spaces as well.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'll give you updates from the US now. Last week, the Arizona legislature passed SB 1511, the Detransitioner Bill of Rights, which requires that health insurers that provide coverage for so-called gender transition procedures must also cover detransition procedures. If this bill is signed into law, Arizona would be the first state in the nation to protect the rights of detransitioned individuals. In response, the WDI USA Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Caucus issued a statement commending the legislators who supported the bill and urging Governor Hobbs to sign this common sense measure. Next, the Our Bodies, Our Sports Take Back Title IX bus tour most recently held events in Oklahoma City, Whitefish, Montana, and Salt Lake City, Utah, and continues this week with planned stops in Las Vegas, Scottsdale, and Omaha on the 12th, 13th, and 16th, respectively. In addition to large rallies, scheduled tour events include press conferences and meet and greets, as well as stops at sporting events, state houses, and college campuses across the country. On June 5th, Congresswoman Mary Miller led 67 of her House Republican colleagues in introducing legislation that would reverse the Biden administration's Title IX rule, which allows men to enter women and girls' private spaces. The new rule puts girls at risk and is a blatant violation of the protections Title IX was meant to guarantee. And last week, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed HB 608, the Women's Safety and Protection Act, into law. Inspired by the Women's Bill of Rights, the bill defines words such as woman, man, mother, and father in sex-based terms and provides for sex-segregated bathrooms and locker rooms in public schools, as well as in domestic violence centers and correctional facilities. So that's really good news out of Louisiana. In other news, Lambda Legal, the New York-based nonprofit that focuses on defending the civil rights of LGBTQ+ people, last week unveiled plans to invest $180 million to nearly double the organization's litigation docket capacity and sustain its work for the fight ahead. So we have that to look forward to. And finally, on June 6th, members of the American College of Pediatricians held a press conference in Washington, D.C. to launch their Doctors Protecting Children Declaration, which calls on prominent medical organizations in the U.S. to immediately stop the promotion of social affirmation, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for children and adolescents who experience distress over their biological sex. Instead, these organizations should recommend comprehensive evaluations and therapies aimed at identifying and addressing underlying psychological comorbidities and neurodiversity that often predispose to and accompany gender dysphoria. Doctors Protecting Children is a coalition of doctors and other healthcare professionals who have serious concerns about the physical and mental health effects of the current protocols promoted for the care of children and adolescents in the United States who express discomfort with their biological sex. The declaration affirms that sex is a dimorphic, innate trait defined in relation to an organization's biological role in reproduction, and that medical decision-making should not be based upon an individual's thoughts and feelings, as in gender identity or gender expression, but rather should be based upon an individual's biological sex. And those are quotes from the document. In addition to asking physicians and healthcare professionals across the nation to sign on to the declaration, the coalition encourages those who are members of these professional organizations to contact leadership and urge them to adhere to the evidence-based research now available. And that's all for me today. Thank you.